Alrighty. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Chapter 1. Preface. Most of the adventures recorded in this book really occurred Most of the adventures recorded in this book really occurred. One or two were experiences of my own. The rest So here's what we're doing. We're working on our reading voice. And so there's a zone we're going to have to find how to get into. So let's take a sip of this tea. How's your day going? Good? Awesome. Preface. Most of the adventures recorded in this book really occurred. One or two were experiences of my own. The rest, those of the boys who were schoolmates of mine. That is an awkward sentence. Huck Finn is drawn from life, Tom Sawyer also, but not from an individual. He is a combination of the characteristics of three boys whom I knew, and therefore belongs to the composite order of architecture. The odd superstitions touched upon were all prevalent among children and slaves in the West at the period of this story, that is to say, 30 or 40 years ago. Although my book is intended mainly for the entertainment of boys and girls, I hope it will not be shunned by men and women on the account, for part of my plan has been to try to pleasantly remind adults of what they once were themselves, and of how they felt and thought and talked, and what queer enterprises they sometimes engaged in. Alright, the author, Hartford. That was written in 1876. I guess he wrote a foreword for the book at a later edition. So here we are, Chapter 1, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So we got this illustration. I presume this is Tom. Tom! No answer. Tom! No answer. What's gone with that boy, I wonder? You, Tom! No answer. The old lady pulled her spectacles down and looked over them about the room. Then she put them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them, for so small a thing as a boy. They were her state pair, the pride of her heart, and were built for style, not service. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. She looked perplexed for a moment, and then said, not fiercely, but still loudly enough for the furniture to hear. Alright, here's Aunt Polly beguiled, I guess. There's an illustration. Hang on. So let's figure out how there's order there. Okay, so they write down all this shit here, but they don't give you every single picture. Which I suppose that's fine. We can just read this text here. So the old lady pulled her spectacles down and looked over the room, and then she pulled them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them, for so small a thing as a boy. They were her state pair, the pride of her heart, and were built for style, not service. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. She looked perplexed for a moment, and then said, see, this is what we gotta watch out for, is when you speed up too quickly, and then you're getting a tongue twister kind of thing. We'll figure this out. She looked perplexed for a moment, and then said, not fiercely, but still loudly enough for the furniture to hear, well, I lay if I get hold of you, owl. She did not finish, for by this time she was bending down and punching under the bed with the broom, and so she needed breath to punctuate the punches with. She resurrected nothing but the cat. I never did see the beat of that boy. She went to the open door and stood in it, and looked out among the tomato vines and Jimson weeds that constituted the garden. No Tom. So she lifted up her voice at an angle calculated for distance and shouted, yeah, Tom, Tom. She's looking for Tom. This Tom fella here that they named this book after. Ugh. There was a slight noise behind her, and she turned just in time to seize a small boy by the slack of his roundabout and arrest his flight. These people were much more artful with their language. I don't know if it's just Mark Twain, but this sentence here. There was a slight noise behind her, and she turned just in time to seize a small boy by the slack of his roundabout and arrest his flight. Translation: she got his ass. There I might have thought of that closet. What you been doing in there? Nothing. Presumably Tom replies, nothing. Look at your hands, and look at your mouth. What is that trunk? I don't know, Auntie. Well, I know. It's jam. That's what it is. 40 times I've said, if you didn't let that jam alone, I'd skin you. Hand me that switch. The switch hovered in the air. Excuse me. The switch hovered in the air. Peril was desperate. My, look behind you, Aunt. The old lady whirled around and snatched her skirts out of danger. The lad fled on the instant, scrambled up the high board fence, and disappeared over it. His Aunt Polly stood surprised a moment, and then broke into a gentle laugh. Hang the boy. Can't I never learn anything? Ain't he played me tricks enough like that for me to be looking out for him by this time? But old fools is this beggar's biggest fools there is. Can't learn. Let me do that one over. But old fools is the biggest fools there is. Can't learn an old dog new tricks, as the saying is. But my goodness, he never plays them alike. 2 days, and how is a body to know what's coming? He appears to know just how long he can torment me before I get my dander up, and he knows if he can make out to put me off for a minute or make me laugh, it's all down again, and I can't hit him a lick. I ain't doing my duty by that boy, and that's the Lord's truth. Goodness knows. Spare the rod and spoil the child. Spoil the child. Spile the child? What is that word? Spile. Spile, a small wooden peg or spigot for stopping a cask, a large heavy timber driven from the ground. As a verb, it means spile, broach a cast with a peg. I guess that's some sort of dated vernacular. Spare the rod and spile the child. Or is it even pronounced spile? Let's see.
Spile.
It is pronounced spile. Well, spare the rod and spile the child, as the good book says. I'm a laying up sin and suffering for us, both I know. He's full of the old scratch, but laws o' me. He's my own dead sister's boy, poor thing, and I ain't got the heart to lash him somehow. Every time I let him off, my conscience does hurt me so, and every time I hit him, my old heart most breaks. Well, man that is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble, as the scripture says. And I reckon it's so. He'll play hooky this evening, and Southwestern for afternoon. Huh? Oh, they put an asterisk that evening means afternoon in the Southwest. Like, that's the confusing word. He'll play hooky this evening, and I'll just be obliged. It doesn't say obliged, it says obliged. Is that how obliged is really spelled? Let's see. Obliged. To require, constrain as by law, command, conscience, or force of necessary. Obliged or obliged? Obliged. See, obliged and obliged are two different words. Or maybe it's like one of those things where like they spelled words differently back then. I'll just be obliged to make him work tomorrow to punish him. It's mighty hard to make him work Saturdays when all the boys is having holiday, but he hates work more than he hates anything, and I've got to do some of my duty by him, or I'll be the ruination of the child. Rhythm is important. If you try to put too much in one breath, the rhythm comes off. Alrighty. Tom did play hooky, and he had a very good time. He got back home barely in season to help Jim, the small colored boy, saw next day's wood, and split the kindlings before supper. At least he was there in time to tell his adventures to Jim, while Jim did 3/4 of the work. Tom's younger brother, or rather half-brother, Sid, was already through with his part of the work, picking up chips, for he was a quiet boy and had no adventurous, troublesome ways. While Tom was eating his supper and stealing sugar as opportunity offered, Aunt Polly asked him questions that were full of guile and very deep, for she wanted to trap him into damaging revealments. Like many other simple-hearted souls, it was her pet vanity to believe she was endowed with a talent for dark and mysterious diplomacy, and she loved to contemplate her most transparent devices as marvels of low cunning, she said. Tom, it was a middling warm in school, weren't it? Yes'm. Powerful warm, wasn't it? Yes'm. Didn't you want to go in swimming, Tom? A bit scare shot through Tom, touch uncomfortable suspicion. He searched Aunt Polly's face, but it told him nothing, so he said, No, well, not very much. The old lady reached out her hand and felt Tom's shirt and said, But you ain't too warm now, though. And it flattered her to reflect that she had discovered that the shirt was dry without anybody knowing that was what she had in her mind. But in spite of her, Tom knew where the wind lay now, so he forestalled what might be the next move. Some of us pumped up on our heads. Let's do that again. Some of us pumped on our heads. Mine's damp yet, you see. Aunt Polly was vexed to think she had overlooked that bit of circumstantial evidence and missed a trick. Then she had a new inspiration. Tom, you didn't have to undo your shirt collar where I sewed it to pump on your head, did you? Unbutton your jacket. The vernacular, well, I don't know, the vernacular is not the problem. It's the cadence. Being able to figure out which cadence you're going to say each sentence in. Ugh. Tom, you didn't have to. The trouble vanished out of Tom's face. He opened his jacket. His shirt collar was securely sewed. The trouble vanished out of Tom's face. He opened his jacket. His shirt collar was securely sewed. Bother. Well, go along with you. I'd made sure you'd played hooky and been a swimming, but I forgive you, Tom. I reckon you're a kind of singed cat, as the saying is. Better in your luck this time. So, is Tom Sawyer set somewhere specifically in the United States? Like somewhere around the Mississippi, I presume? Like, is it like St. Petersburg, Missouri? So I wonder if I could look up what is a Missouri accent? Like, just to approximate maybe a little closer to the St. Louis, Missouri versus Southern Missouri accent. Alright, we'll see what this chick has to say for herself.
Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Laura and this is Small Stuff Big Family. Today I'm going to be doing the accent tag video. I got the idea for this video from Jenny from Jennifer G Family and Carissa. I do think my accent has changed. In the description box down below. Please let me know if you do this challenge and I will leave. My username is small of different words to say and I will leave them on the screen just in case I don't. Okay. Envelope, root, theater, caught, salmon, caramel.
Is that how they say like that?
Fire.
I don't think that's what it is. I think that's just this chick.
So we met you from St. So we all went back
All
for
right, we'll
Thanksgiving
see John Hamm,
to
St. Louis.
and shake the tree for her. And she has a pretty great St. Louis. It's just so awesome. And then we would say that there's a highway that bisects St. Louis, Highway 40. But if you're in Bayfire.
This is not the information on Missouri accent video, American accents.
Back in Missouri, we kind of talk like this. We draw
Back in Missouri, we kind of talk like this.
out our sounds. We
We
say
draw
y'all,
our
how
sounds,
y'all
we say
doing?
y'all,
Yeah,
how
exactly.
y'all doing, yeah.
Do you have any
Alright. This is how we talk in Missouri. Now, let's see if we can apply this to the source material here. Then you want to go on swimming, Tom? A bit scared of shot through Tom. A touch of comfortable suspicion. He searched Aunt Polly's face, but it told him nothing. So he said, "No, well, not very much." The old lady reached out her hand and felt Tom's shirt and said, "But you ain't too warm now, though." And it flattered her to reflect that she had discovered that the shirt was dry without anybody knowing that was what she had in her mind. Well, that's kind of awkward. I'll just read normally. Or maybe, I don't even know. She was half sorry her sagacity had miscarried, and half glad that Tom had stumbled into obedient conduct for once. How about when they're speaking, we'll do the accent. But Sidney said, "Well now, if I didn't think you'd sewed his collar with white thread, but it's black." "Why, I did sew it with white, Tom." But Tom did not wait for the rest. As he went out the back door, he said, "Sidney, I'll lick you for that." In a safe place, Tom exclaimed two large needles, which were thrust into the lapels of his jacket, and had thread bound upon them. One needle carried white thread, and the other black, he said. "She'd never notice if I hadn't been for Sid. Confound it. Sometimes she sews it with white, and sometimes she sews it with black. I wish to Ginny Minnie she'd stick to one or the other. I can't keep the run of 'em. But I bet you, lamb, Sid, for that I'll learn 'em." He was not the model boy of the village. He knew the model boy very well, though, and loathed him. Within 2 minutes, or even less, he had forgotten all his troubles. Not because his troubles were one whit less heavy and bitter to him than a man's are to a man, but because a new and powerful interest bore them down and drove them out of his mind for the time. Just as men's misfortunes are blah 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 blah. We'll try that again. Just as men's misfortunes are forgotten in the excitement of new enterprises, this new interest was valued novelty in whistling. His new interest was a valued novelty in whistling, which he had just acquired from a Negro, and was suffering to practice it undisturbed. Let's try that paragraph from the beginning. Within 2 minutes or even less, he had forgotten all his troubles, not because his troubles were one whit less heavy and bitter to him than a man's are to a man, but because a new and powerful interest then bore them down and drove them out of his mind for the time. Just as men's misfortune are forgotten in the excitement of new enterprises. This new interest was a valued novelty in whistling, which he had just acquired from a Negro. He was suffering to practice it undisturbed. It consisted in a peculiar bird-like turn, a sort of liquid warble, produced by touching the tongue to the roof of the mouth at short intervals in the midst of music. The reader probably remembers how to do it if he has ever been a boy. Diligence and attention soon gave him the knack of it, and he strode down the street with his mouth full of harmony and his soul full of gratitude. He felt much as an astronomer feels who has discovered a new planet. No doubt, as far as strong, deep, unalloyed pleasure is concerned, the advantage was with the boy, not the astronomer. The summer evenings were long. It was not dark yet, Presently, Tom checked his whistle. A stranger was before him, a boy, a shade larger than him. A newcomer of any age, or either sex, was an impressive curiosity in the poor little shabby village of St. Petersburg. This boy was well dressed too, well dressed on a weekday. This was simply astounding. His cap was a dainty thing. His closed-button blue cloth roundabout was new and natty, and so were his pantaloons. He had shoes on, and it was only Friday. He even wore a necktie, a bright bit of ribbon. Let's try this over. The summer evenings were long. It was not dark yet. Presently, Tom checked his whistle. So what's okay? So you have all these little notations, these like dashes, these commas and shit like that, and they're put in specific areas to give you a pause. It's not for like grammatical. It's less for grammatical, and it's more so you can get into the rhythm of it. The summer evenings were long. It was not dark yet. Presently, Tom checked his whistle. A stranger was before him, a boy a shade larger than himself. A newcomer of any age or sex was an impressive curiosity in the poor little shabby village of St. Petersburg. This boy was well dressed, too. Well dressed on a weekday. This was simply astounding. His cap was a dainty thing. His closed-button blue cloth roundabout was new and natty, and so were his pantaloons. He had shoes on, and it was only Friday. He even wore a necktie, a bright bit of ribbon. He had citified air about him that ate in Tom's vitals. Cityfied? Like he's a cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world. The more Tom stared at the splendid marvel, the higher he turned up his nose at his finery, and the shabbier and shabbier his outfit seemed to him to grow. Neither boy spoke. If one moved, the other moved, but only sideways, in a circle. They kept face to face and eye to eye all the time. Finally, Tom said, "I can lick ya. I'd like to see you try it." "Well, I can do it." "No, you can't, either." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." Can't. An uncomfortable pause. Then Tom said, "What's your name?" "'Tisn't any of your business, maybe." "Well, I'll make it my business." "Well, why don't you?" "If you say much, I will. If you say much, I will." This vernacular, man, it's challenging to get into in a way, but it's just so much more fun than how we talk today. I don't know. Maybe I'm just nostalgic for shit that never existed. So let's see this whole. Let's break down this talking sort of thing and see if we can get into a decent sort of ribbon here. Let's play this little thing again so I can remind. What is the Missouri accent like?
Any questions? I can answer you.
Oh, tell me where you're from, what are you doing, where
Tell me where you're from, what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm from Missouri. I'm from Missouri. Alright. Neither boy spoke. If one moved, the other moved, but only sideways, in a circle. They kept face to face, eye to eye, all the time. Finally, Tom said, "I can lick you." That doesn't work at all. How am I supposed to do a southern accent for a child? "I can lick you. I'd like to see you try it." "Well, I can do it." "No, you can't." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." "I can." "Can't." Man, it's a skill. There's a skill. If you get good at reading it, you can make that shit work. An uncomfortable pause. Then Tom said, "What's your name?" "'Tisn't any business, maybe. 'Tisn't any of your business, maybe." "Well, I'll make it my business." "Well, why don't you?" "If you say much, I will. Much. There now." You think you're mighty smart, don't you? I could lick you with one hand tied behind my back if I wanted to." "Well, why don't you do it? You say you can do it." "Yes, I will if you're fooling with me." "Oh, yes, I've seen whole families in the same fix. Smarty, you think you're some now, don't you?" "Oh, what a hat." "You can love that hat if you don't like it. I dare you to knock it off, and anybody that'll take a dare will suck eggs." Suck eggs? Was that a diss back in the day? "You're a liar." "You're another liar." "You're a fighting liar and it doesn't take it up." "I'll take a walk." "Say, if you give me much more of your sass, I'll take and bounce a rock off and on your head." That is an awkward sentence. Let's see if we can nail that one. "Say, if you give me much more of your sass, I'll take and bounce a rock off on your head now." "Of course you will." "Yes, I will." Why don't you do it then?" Alright, so we have these italicized words here. Let's see how it sounds if we emphasize them. Oh, of course you will. Well, I will. Well, why don't you do it then? Why do you keep saying you will do it? Will for. Why don't you do it? It's because you're afraid. I ain't afraid. You are. I ain't. You are. Another pause and more eyeing and settling around each other. Presently they were shoulder to shoulder. Tom said, "Get away from here. Go away yourself." "I won't. I won't either." Well, I should probably try to come up with two different voices. We can't have the same voice. Well, let's say Tom's a little up here. "Get away from here." And then this guy's older, so he'll be a little more like this. "Get away from here. Go away yourself." "I won't. I won't either." So they stood each with a foot placed at an angle as a brace, and both shoving with might and main, and glowering at each other with hate. But neither could get an advantage. After struggling till both were hot and flushed, each relaxed his strain with watchful caution, and Tom said, "You're a coward, pup. You're a coward and a pup. I'll tell you my big brother on you, and he can thrash you with his little finger, and I'll make him do it too." "What I care about your big brother? I got a brother that's bigger than he is. And what's more, he can throw him over that fence too." "That's a lie." "Your saying so don't make it so." Tom drew a line in the dust with his big toe and said, "I dare you to step over that, and I'll lick you till you can't stand up, and anyway that'll take a dare will steal sheep." The new boy stepped over promptly and said, "Now, you said you'd do it. Now let's see you do it." "Don't you crowd me now. You better look out." "Well, you said you'd do it. Why don't you do it?" "By jingo, for 2 cents I will do it." The new boy took 2 broad coppers out of his pocket and held them out with derision. Tom struck them to the ground. In an instant, both boys were rolling and tumbling in the dirt, gripping each other like cats, and for the space of a minute they tugged and tore at each other's hair and clothes, punched and scratched each other's noses, covered themselves with dust and glory. Presently the confusion took form, and through the fog of battle, Tom appeared. Seated astride the new boy, and pounding him with his fists. "All or enough," said he. The boy only struggled to free himself. He was crying, mainly from rage. "All or enough!" And the pounding went on. At last the stranger got out another. "Enough! Enough!" And Tom let him up and said, "Now you learn that. Now that'll learn you. Better Now that'll learn you. Better look out who you're fooling with next time." The boy went off, brushing the dust with his clothes, sobbing, snuffling, and occasionally looking back and shaking his head and threatening what he would do to Tom. The next time he caught up him, I'm gonna. To which Tom responded with jeers, starting off in a high feather. And as soon as his back was turned, the boy snatched up a stone, threw it, and hit him between the shoulders, and turned tail and ran like an antelope. Tom chased the traitor home, and thus found out where he lived. He then held a position at the gate for some time, daring the enemy to come outside, but the enemy only made faces at him through the window and declined. At last the enemy's mother appeared, and called Tom a bad, vicious, vulgar child, and ordered him away, so he went away. But then he said he loathed to lay for that boy. Got home pretty late that night, and when he climbed cautiously in the window, he uncovered an ambuscade. What is that? An ambuscade? An ambuscade?
Ambuscade. Ambuscade.
Our sensibilities are being an ambuscade. It's kind of like an ambush. It's like an old version of the word ambush. He uncovered an ambuscade in the person of his aunt, and when she saw the state his clothes were in her resolution to turn his Saturday holiday into captivity at hard labor before adamantine in his firmness. Which say that sentence again. He got home pretty late last night, and when he climbed cautiously in blah 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 blah. He got home pretty late last night, and when he climbed cautiously in at the window, he uncovered an ambuscade in the person of his aunt. And when she saw the state his clothes were in, her resolution to turn his Saturday holiday into captivity at hard labor became adamantine in its firmness. End of chapter 1. So, we meet this little fella named Tom. He has an aunt that is strict, has, I don't know if it's a strained relationship, but he's kind of a troublemaker, and she's trying to lay down the law. I think there's a character named Sydney. I don't remember exactly what his relation to Tom was again. Tom has an older brother. And he met some random other kid that he got in a fight with, and he kind of won the fight. So chapter 2. Saturday morning was come, and all the summer world was bright and fresh and brimming with life. There was a song in every heart, and if the heart was young, the music issued at the lips. There was cheer in every face, and a spring in every step. The locust trees were in bloom, and the fragrance of the blossoms filled the air. Cardiff Hill, beyond the village and above it, was green with vegetation, and it lay just far enough away to seem a delectable land, dreamy, reposeful, and inviting. Tom appeared on the sidewalk with a bucket of whitewash and a long-handled brush. He surveyed the fence, and all gladness left him, and a deep melancholy settled down upon his spirit. 30 yards of board fence, 9 feet high. Life to him seemed hollow, and existence but a burden. Sighing, he dipped his brush and passed along the topmost plank, repeated the operation, did it again, compared the insignificant whitewashed streak with the far-reaching continent of unwhitewashed fence, and sat down on a tree box, discouraged. Jim came skipping out of the gate with a tin pail and singing Buffalo Gals, Buffalo Gals. How did people know songs back in the day? In the 1800s? Bringing water from the town pump had always been hateful work in Tom's eyes. Before trading playthings, quarreling, fighting, I skipped. Before, but now it did not strike him so. Bringing water from the town pump had always been hateful work in Tom's eyes before, but now it did not strike him so. He remembered that there was company at the pump. White, mulatto, and Negro boys and girls were always there waiting in their turns, resting, trading playthings, quarreling, fighting, and skylarking. And he remembered that although the pump was only 150 yards off, Jim never got back with a bucket of water under an hour. And even then, somebody generally had to go after him, Tom said. Say, Jim, I'll fetch the water if you'll whitewash some. Jim shook his head and said, Can't. Morris, Tom. Oh, missus, she told me I ain't got to get this water and not fooling around with anybody. She said Spec Master go on and ask to me whitewashing, so she told me to go along to attend my own business. She knows she's sent upon whitewashing. Well, that's going to be very tough to read, all this like weird. Let's read this very slowly. I guess what I gather is this is like a black dude or whatever. Can't Morris Tom all misses? She told me I got to go and get this water and not stop fooling around with anybody. She said she expect Morris going to ask me to whitewash, and so she told me to go along and tend my own business. She allowed she'd tend me to do some whitewashing. Damn. So who is this? Let's read this paragraph back. This is Jim. So who is Jim? Jim. And remember that although the pump was only 100, Jim never got back with a bucket of So then who is Jim? Was Jim mentioned before now in this shit? Alright, so Jim is a colored boy in town. And he's friends with Tom. Okay. Alright, so. And what is whitewash? Does that mean painting the fence? Is that what's going on? Whitewash. Because whitewash today means like, yeah, whitewash is painting. Okay. So this is Tom asking Jim, colored boy, for a favor. Say, Jim, I'll fetch the water if you'll whitewash some. Jim shook his head and said, Damn, Morris Tom, all missus, she told me I gotta get this water and not stop fooling around with anybody. She said she expect Mars tomorrow. Going to me asked me to whitewash, and so she told me to get along and tend my own business. She allowed she'd tend me to do the whitewashing. I'll be honest, I have no idea what the fuck he even just said, but I get the essence. Never mind what she said, Jim. Oh, never mind what she said, Jim. That's just the way she talks. Give me the bucket. I won't be gone only a minute. She won't ever know. Oh, I doesn't... Mars Tom? He calls him Mars Tom. What does that mean? Is he saying Master Tom? I don't think that's right. Mars Tom. Tom Sawyer. Mars Tom. What does Mars Tom mean? Yo, no, he is saying Master Tom. Okay. Master Tom. Master Tom. Okay. Can't, Master Tom. Oh, Mrs. told me I gotta get this water and stop fooling around with everybody. She expect me and Master Tom get the extra whitewash. And so she told me long ago to tell my business she allowed me whitewashing. Oh, never mind what she said, Jim. That's just the way she talks. Give me the bucket. I won't be gone only a minute. She won't ever know. Oh, I doesn't, Master Tom. Oh, Mrs. She'd take the head off me. Indeed she would. She'd take the head off me, indeed she would. She never licks anybody or acts them over the head with her thimble, maybe. Who cares for that? I'd like to know. She talks awful, but talk don't hurt. Anyways, it don't. If she don't cry, Jim, I'll give you a marble. I'll give you a white alley. Jim began to waver. White alley, Jim, and it's a bully top. My, that's a mighty gay marvel, I tell you. But Master Tom, I was powerful afraid of old missus. Besides, if you will, I'll show you my sore toe. Jim was only human. The attraction was too much for him. He put down the pail, took the white alley, and bent over with the toe, with absorbing interest with the bandage was being unwounded. In another moment, he was flying down the street with his pail in a tingling rear. Tom was whitewashing with vigor, and Aunt Polly was retiring from the field with a slipper in her hand and triumph in her eye. But Tom's energy did not last. He began to think of the fun he had planned for his day, and his sorrows multiplied. Soon the free boys would come tripping along on all sorts of delicious expeditions, and they would make a world of fun of him for having to work. The very thought of it burnt him like fire. He got his worldly wealth and examined it, bits of toys, marbles, and trash, enough to buy in exchange of work, maybe, but not half enough to buy so much as half an hour of pure freedom. So he returned his straitened means by his pocket, and gave up the idea of trying to buy the boys. At this dark and hopeless moment, an inspiration burst upon him. Nothing less than a great, magnificent inspiration. He took up his brush and went tranquilly to work. Ben Rogers hove in sight presently, the very boy of all boys whose ridicule he had been dreading. Ben's gait was the hopping, skipping, and jump-proof enough that his heart was light and his anticipation was high. He was eating an apple and giving a long, melodious whoop at intervals, followed by a deep-toned dig-dong, ding-dong, ding-dong, for he was personating a steamboat. As he drew near, he slackened speed, took the middle of the street, leaned far over to the starboard, and rounded to ponderously, and with laborious pomp and circumstance, for he was personating the big Missouri, and considered himself to be drawing 9 feet of water. He was boat, and captain, and engine bells combined, so he had to imagine himself standing on his own hurricane deck, giving the orders and executing them. "Stop her, sir, ding-a-ling-ling." The headway ran almost out, and he drew up and slowly toward the sidewalk. "Ship up to back, ting-a-ling-ling." His arms straightened and stiffened down his sides. "Set her back on the starboard, ting-a-ling, chow-chow, choo-choo, 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 ting-a-ling-ling." He's making boat noises. His right hand, meantime, described stately circles, for it was presently a 40-foot wheel. Let her go back on larboard. Ding-a-ling, chow-chow, choo-choo, choo-choo, choo-choo. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, choo-choo, choo-choo. The left hand began to describe circles. Stop the starboard. Ding. Stop the starboard. Come ahead on the starboard. Stop her. Let your outside turn over. Ding-a-ling, choo-choo. Get out of that headline lively now. Come out with your spring line. What are you about there? Take a turn around the stump of the bright of it. Stand by the stage now. Let her go. Done with the engine, sir. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. Shit. What? This is so weird. Tom went on whitewashing, paid no attention to the steamboats. Ben stared a moment and then said, "Hi, you're up a stump, aren't you?" No answer. Tom surveyed his touch with an eye of an artist, and he gave his brush another gentle sweep and surveyed the result. As before, Ben ranged up alongside of him. Tom's mouth watered for the apple, but he stuck to his work. Ben said, "Hello, old chap. You got to work, hey?" Tom wheeled suddenly and said, Why, it's you, Ben. I ain't noticing." "Say, I ain't going for a swim, I am. Do you wish you could? But of course you'd rather work, wouldn't you?" "Of course you would." Tom contemplated the boy a bit and said, "What do you call work?" "Why, ain't that work?" Tom resumes his whitewashing and answers carelessly, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it ain't. All I know is it suits Tom Sawyer." "Oh, come now. You don't mean to let on that you like it." The brush continues to move. Like it? Well, I don't see why I oughtn't like it. Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day? This put the things in a new light. Ben stopped nibbling his apple. Tom swept his brush daintily back and forth, stepped back to note the effect, added a touch here and there, criticizing the effect again. Ben watching every move and getting more and more interested, more and more absorbed. Presently he said, "Say, Tom, let me whitewash a little." Tom considered, was about to consent, but he altered his mind. Nah, I reckon it wouldn't hardly do, Ben. You see, Aunt Polly's awfully particular about this fence right here on the street, you know. But if it was the back fence, I wouldn't mind. She wouldn't. Yeah. She's awful particular about this fence. It's got to be done very carefully. I reckon there ain't one boy in 1,000, maybe 2,000, that can do it this way. It's got to be done. Do it the way it's got to be done. No? Is that so? Oh, come now. Let me just try only just a little. I'll let you, if you was me, Tom. Yeah, I like to be honest, Injun. But Aunt Polly, well, Jim wanted to do it, but she wouldn't let him. Sid wanted to do it, she wouldn't let Sid. Now don't you see how I'm fixed? If you was to tackle this fence, and anything was to happen to it, oh, shucks, I'll just be just careful. Now let me try. Say, I'll give you one core of my apple. Well, here. Now, Ben, don't be. I'm afraid. I'll give you all of it. Tom gave up the brush with reluctance in his face, but alacrity in his heart. And while the late steamer, Big Missouri, worked and sweated in the sun, the retired artist sat on a barrel in the shade close by, dangled his legs, munched his apple, planned the slaughter of more innocents. There was no lack of material. Boys happened along every little while. They came to jeer, but remained to whitewash. By the time Ben was fagged out, that's a funny word, Tom had traded the next chance to Billy Fisher for a kite and good repair, and when he played out Johnny Miller, by the time Ben was fagged out, Tom had traded his chance. Alright, let's try this paragraph again. By the time Ben was fagged out, Tom had traded the next chance to Billy Fisher for a kite in good repair. And when he played out, Johnny Miller bought in for a dead rat and a string of swinging with it, and so on, hour after hour. And when the middle of the afternoon come, from being a poor, poverty-stricken boy in the morning, Tom was literally rolling in wealth. He had, besides the things before mentioned, 12 marbles, part of his Jew's harp, a piece of blue bottle glass to look through, a spool cannon, a key that wouldn't unlock anything, a fragment of chalk, a glass stopper of a decanter, a tin soldier, a couple of tadpoles, 6 firecrackers, a kitten with only one eye, a brass doorknob, a dog collar but no dog, the handle of a knife, 4 pieces of orange peel, and a dilapidated old window sash. He had a good idle time. He had a nice good idle time while all He had a nice good idle time all the while. Plenty of company. The fence had 3 coats of whitewash on it. If he hadn't run out of whitewash, he would have bankrupted every boy in the village. Tom said to himself that it was not such a hollow world after all. He had discovered a great law of human action without knowing it, namely, that in order to make a man or a boy covet a thing, it is only necessary to make the thing difficult to attain. If he had been a great and wise philosopher, like the writer of this book, he would now have comprehended that work consists of whatever a body is obliged to, and that play consists of whatever a body is not obliged to. And this would help him to understand why constructing artificial flowers or performing on a treadmill is work, and while rolling 10 pins or climbing Mount Blanc is only amusement. There are wealthy gentlemen in England who drive 4-horse passenger coaches 20 or 30 miles on a daily line in the summer because the privilege costs them considerable money. But if they were offered wages for the service, that would turn it into work, and they would resign. The boy mused a while over the substantial change which had taken place in his worldly circumstances, and then wended towards headquarters to report. Chapter 3. I'm digging this. We've been going almost, we're coming up on an hour, 52 minutes. Well, let's do chapter 3 and we'll call it quits. Tom presented himself before Aunt Polly, who was sitting by an open window in a pleasant rearward apartment, which was bedroom, breakfast room, dining room, and library combined. The balmy summer air, the restful quiet, the odor of the flowers, and the drowsy murmur of the bees had their effect, and she was nodding over her knitting, for she had no company but the cat, and it was asleep in her lap. Her spectacles were propped up on her gray head for safety. She had thought that of course Tom had deserted long ago, and she wondered at seeing him place himself in her power again in his intrepid way. He said, Mayn't I go and play now, Aunt? What, Ray, have you all been done? It's all been done, Aunt. Tom, don't lie to me. Dear, I can't bear it. I ain't, Aunt, it's all done. Aunt Polly placed small trust in such evidence. She went out to see for herself, and she could have been content to find 20% of Tom's statement true. When she had found the entire fence whitewashed, and not only whitewashed but elaborately coated and recoated, and even a streak added to the ground, her astonishment was almost unspeakable. She said, "Oh, I never. There's no getting around it. You can work when you're in mine too, Tom." And she diluted the compliment by adding, but it's powerful seldom you're a mind to. I'm bound to say, well, go along and play, but mind you, get some time in a week or I'll tan you. She was so overcome by the splendor of his achievement that she took him into the closet and selected a choice apple and delivered it to him, along with an improving lecture upon the added value and flavor a treat took to itself when it came without sin, through virtuous effort. And while she closed with a happy scriptural flourish, he hooked a donut. I don't even know what that means. Then he skipped out and saw Sid just starting up the outside stairway that led to the back rooms of the second floor. Clods were handy, and the air was full of them. In a twinkling, they raged round Sid like a hailstorm, and before Aunt Polly could collect her surprised faculties and sally to the rescue, 6 or 7 clods had taken personal effect, and Tom was over the fence and gone. There was a gate, but as the general thing, he was too crowded for time to make use of it. His soul was at peace, now that he had settled with Sid for calling attention to his black thread and getting him into trouble. Let's do that paragraph over. Then he skipped out and saw Sid was starting up the outside stairway that led to the back rooms on the second floor. Clods were handy, and the air was full of them in a twinkling. They raged around Sid like a hailstorm, and before Aunt Polly could collect her surprised faculties and sally to the rescue, 6 or 7 clods had taken personal effect, and Tom was over the fence and gone. There was a gate, but as a general thing, he was too crowded for time to make use of it. His soul was at peace, now that he had settled with Sid for calling attention to his black thread and getting him into trouble. Tom skirted the block and came around into a muddy alley that led by the back of his aunt's cow stable. Tom skirted the block and came around into a muddy alley that led by the back of his aunt's cow stable. He presently got safely beyond the reach of capture and punishment and hastened toward the public square of the village, where 2 military companies of boys had met for conflict, according to previous appointment. Tom was general of one of these armies. Joe Harper, a bosom fiend, a bosom friend. What is a bosom friend? What is that supposed to mean? A bosom friend. A friend of the bosom? A friend you like a lot and have a lot of very close relationships with. Okay, I guess it's like a really good friend. Tom was general of one of these armies. Joe Harper, a bosom friend, general of the other. These 2 great commanders did not condescend to fight in person, that being better suited to the still smaller fry, but sat together of an eminence and conducted the field operations by orders delivered through aides de camp. Tom's army won a great victory after a long and hard-fought battle. Then the dead were counted, prisoners exchanged, terms of the next disagreement agreed upon, and the day for the necessary battle appointed. After which the armies fell into line and marched away, and Tom turned homeward alone. Man, I like these illustrations a lot. Like these kids with these fucking these look like these fucking conquistador hats and whatever, and these sticks and shit, and drums. As he was passing by the house where Jeff Thatcher lived, he saw a new girl in the garden. A lovely little blue-eyed creature with yellow hair, plaited into 2 long tails, white summer frock, and embroidered pantalettes. Let's do that again. As he was passing by the house where Jeff Thatcher lived, he saw a new girl in the garden. A lovely little blue-eyed creature with yellow hair, plaited into two long tails, white summer frock, and embroidered pantalettes. Pantalettes. If I figure those are like a female pants. The fresh-crowned hero fell without firing a shot. A certain Amy Lawrence vanished out of his heart and left not even a memory of herself behind. He had thought he loved her to distraction. He had regarded his passion as adoration, and behold, it was only a poor little evanescent partiality. He had been months winning her. She had confessed hardly a week ago. He had been the happiest and the proudest boy in the world only 7 short days. And here in one instant of time she had gone out of his heart like a casual stranger whose visit is done. He worshipped this new angel with furtive eyes, till he saw that she had discovered him. Then he pretended he did not know she was present, and began to show off in all sorts of absurd, boyish ways, in order to win her admiration. He kept up the grotesque foolishness for some time, but by and by, while he was in the midst of some dangerous gymnastic performance, he glanced aside and saw that the little girl was wending her way towards the house. Tom came to the fence and leaned on it, grieving and hoping she would tarry yet a while longer. She halted a moment on the steps and then moved toward the door. Tom heaved a great sigh as she put her foot on the threshold, but his face lit up right away, for she topped a pansy over the fence a moment before she disappeared. A pansy? Like a flower? Huh. Okay. The boy ran around and stopped within a foot or two of the flower, and then shaded his eyes with his hand and began to look down the street as if he had discovered something of interest going on in that direction. Presently, he picked up a straw and began trying to balance on his nose. With his head tilted far back, and as he moved from side to side, in his efforts he edged nearer and nearer towards the pansy. Finally, his bare foot rested upon it, his pliant toes closed upon it, and he hopped away with the treasure and disappeared round the corner, but only for a minute. Only while he could button the flower inside his jacket next to his heart, or next to his stomach, possibly, for it was not much posted in anatomy, and not hypercritical anyway. He returned now and hung about the fence till nightfall, showing off, as before, but the girl never exhibited herself again, though Tom comforted himself a little with the hope that she had been near some window meantime and been aware of his attentions. Finally, he strode home reluctantly, with his poor head full of visions. All through supper his spirits were so high that his aunt wondered what had gotten into this child. What had gotten into this child? I've forgotten my accent thing. He had a good scolding about clotting Sid. It did not seem to mind it in the least. He tried to steal sugar under his aunt's very nose and got his knuckles rapped for it. He said, "Aunt, you don't whack Sid when he takes it. Well, Sid don't torment a body the way you do. You'd be always into the sugar if I wasn't watching you." Presently she stepped into the kitchen, and Sid, happy in his immunity, reached for the sugar bowl. A sort of glorying over Tom, which was well nigh unbearable. But Sid's fingers slipped, and the bowl dropped and broke. Tom was in ecstasies. Tom was in ecstasies, the plural of ecstasy. Ecstasies. That's an odd word. Tom was in ecstasies, in such ecstasies that he even controlled his tongue and was silent. He said to himself that he would not speak a word, even when his aunt came in, but would sit perfectly still till she asked who did the mischief, and he would tell, and there would be nothing so good in the world as to see the pet model catch it. He was so brimful of exultation that he could hardly hold himself when the old lady came back and stood above the wreck, discharging lightnings of wrath over her spectacles. He said to himself, "Now it's coming." And the next instant he was sprawling on the floor. The potent palm was uplifted to strike again when Tom cried out, "Hold on! Now what are you belting me for? Sid broke it." Aunt Polly paused, perplexed, and Tom looked for the healing pity. But when she got her tongue again, she only said, "Well, you didn't get a lick of miss, I reckon. You been into some other audacious mischief when I wasn't around like enough." When her conscience reproached her, and she yearned to say something kind and loving, then her conscience reproached her, and she yearned to say something kind and loving, but she judged that this would be construed into a confession that she had been in the wrong, and discipline forbade that. So she kept silent, and went about her affairs with a troubled heart. Tom sulked in a corner and exalted his woes. He knew that in her heart his aunt was on her knees to him, and he was morosely gratified by the consciousness of it. He would hang out no signals. He would take notice of none. He knew that a yearning glance fell upon him now and then through a film of tears, and he refused to recognize it. He knew a yearning glance fell upon him now and then, through a film of tears, and he refused recognition of it. He knew that a yearning glance fell upon him now and then, through a film of tears, but he refused recognition of it. He pictured himself lying sick unto death, and his aunt bending over him, beseeching one little forgiving word, but he would turn his face to the wall and die with that word unsaid. Ah, how would she feel then? And he pictured himself brought home from the river, dead, with his curls all wet, and his sore heart at rest. How she would throw himself upon him, and how her tears would fall like rain, and her lips pray God to give her back her boy, and she would never abuse him any more. But he would lie there cold and white and make no sign, a poor little sufferer whose grief were at an end. He so worked upon his feelings with the pathos of these dreams, and he had to keep swallowing. He was so like to choke, and his eyes swam in a blur of water, which overflowed when he winked, and ran down and trickled from the end of his nose, and such a luxury to him was his petting of his sorrows, that he could not bear to have any worldly cheeriness or any grating delight intrude upon it. It was too sacred for such contact, and so presently, when his cousin Mary danced in, all alive with the joy of seeing home again, after an age-long visit of 1 week to the country, he got up and moved in clouds and darkness out at one door, as she brought song and sunshine in at the other. He wandered far from the accustomed haunts of boys, and sought desolate places that were in harmony with his spirits. A log raft in the river invited him, and he seated himself on its outer edge and contemplated the dreary vastness of the stream, wishing the while that he could only be drowned all at once and unconsciously, without undergoing the uncomfortable routine devised by nature. Then he thought of his flower. He got it out, rumpled and wilted, and it mightily increased his dismal felicity. He wondered if she would pity him if she knew. Would she cry and wish that he had a right to put her arms around his neck and comfort him? Or would she turn coldly away like all the hollow world? This picture brought such an agony of pleasurable suffering that he worked it over and over again in his mind and set it up anew a varied light, till he wore it threadbare. At last he rose up sighting and departed in the darkness. About 9:30 or 10 o'clock, he came along the deserted street to where the adored unknown lived. He paused a moment. No sound fell upon his listening ear. A candle was casting a dull glow upon the curtain of a second-story window. Was the sacred presence there? He climbed the fence, threaded his stealthy way through the plants till he stood under the windows. He looked up at it long and with emotion, and then he lay down upon the ground under it, disposing himself upon his back, with his hands clasped upon his breast and holding his poor wilted flower, and thus he would die, out in the cold world, with no shelter over his homeless head, no friendly hand to wipe his death damps from his brow, no loving face to bend pityingly over him, when the great agony came, and thus she would see him, when she looked out upon the glad morning, and oh, would she drop one little tear upon his poor lifeless form? Would she heave one little sigh to see a bright young life so rudely blighted, so untimely cut down? The window went up. A maidservant's discordant voice profaned the holy calm, and a deluge of water drenched the prone martyr's remains. The strangling hero, this is a funny illustration. He's like waiting outside her bedroom window, I guess. And he's like picturing like, oh, I'm gonna like die here. And then she'll like check out the window and she's gonna cry because I died. But he's waiting outside the chick's window, but then like the maid pops out and like dumps a bunch of water on him. The strangling hero sprang up with a relieving snort. There was a whiz as of a missile in the air, mingled with the murmur of a curse. A sound as of shivering glass followed, and a small vague form went over the fence and shot away in the gloom. Not long after, as Tom, all undressed for bed, was surveying his drenched garments by the light of a tallow dip, Sid woke up. But if he had any dim idea of making any references to illusions, he thought better of it and held his peace, for there was a danger in Tom's eyes. Tom turned in without the added vexation of prayers, and Sid made mental note of the omniscient. That is the end of chapter 3. Alright. Let's call it there. That's an hour 12. Maybe I'll do that like bi-weekly. Just read something. If you do that bi-weekly for like years, you'll get good at reading shit, and you'll read lots of shit. Alrighty.